Remember the sound of a door closing, not a slam, but a calm final click. That was the sound my heart made. When you said it, we were standing in the hallway of our apartment, the one we painted light gray. Because you said it was sophisticated, the air was still thick with the argument, with all the words we'd thrown at each other, that I can't even remember now. But I remember your face, that cool, detached certainty. You weren't angry anymore, you were stating a fact. You looked at me, your bags, already packed by the door, and you said, "It doesn't matter, y'all see, y'all come crawling back." I threw all that chaotic, desperate energy into practical things. I volunteered for a demanding new project at work, something that required total focus. I started running. At first I could only make it to the end of the street, my lungs burning, my legs aching. But I kept going. Each step was a rebellion against the person you thought I was. I dug out my old easel and my acrylic paints, untouched, since before we met the first few canvases were just angry, messy swirls of color. But then I started. You say, "How is cash flow?" I say, "Perfect." Because all profit, you say, something with long silent of the cold. It really is real now, it's impressive. Before I finish talk. But the unspoken agreement of your previous bet in my failure, the end of the phone. I did not talk to negotiate. I say it, not a victory of a person, to say the one line. To say that if the business had your input, all the experience of the wrong premise, the judgment to have a safe job in your father's company. I only put the final answer quiet in the room. It will never not be, that the success was only made for the idea of you, as a business plan of one to be ignored from the start. That is the victory, my company, my life, all the work between the lines, the long hours, the stress, those years. To live these years for myself. The last phone, you were unable to take the truth of the fact that my entire journey, being a woman alone, art, has changed the course of my life, because the fear you caused me has given me something, the end. He said a lot of things on his way out the door, the usual stuff. I suppose that we'd grown apart, that he needed to find himself, but the one that stuck, the one that dug its claws in deep, was his final prediction. He looked me right in the eye, his suitcase already by the door. And he said, "Y'all crumble without me, you know you will, you don't have anyone else." And the worst part, the part that haunted me for weeks, was the silent, terrified whisper in my own heart that maybe he was right. For the first 48 hours, it felt like he was a prophet. The silence in the house was a physical presence. I drifted from room to room, seeing ghosts of us in every corner. The empty space on his side of the bed was a canyon. I didn't eat, I barely slept. I felt this profound, aching loneliness that seemed to confirm his every word. I had let my world shrink to fit just him. My friends were our friends, my family events were our events. He had been the sun, and I had happily become a planet. Painting landscapes, quiet scenes, it was meditative. I was building a new life, brick by brick, habit by habit. And I was doing it without asking for your permission, without even thinking about your approval. His orbit, now the sun was gone, and I was just a cold rock spinning into dark space, utterly alone. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the cabinets, thinking, he's right, this is it. I'm going to break into 1,000 pieces, and there will be no one here to sweep me up. But then, a funny thing happened. A sound at the door, not a knock, more of a firm, familiar rap-tap-tap. It was Sarah from work. She was holding a paper bag smelling of garlic and tomatoes. "I brought lasagna," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just walked in, put the lasagna on the counter, and started opening cabinets for a plate. "You're eating this right now," she commanded. And for the first time in days, I smiled. It was a small, wobbly thing, but it was reals. That was the first thread. Then my phone started buzzing, not with pitying texts, but with concrete plans. My sister started calling every evening just as I was about to hit the lowest point of the day. She'd talk about her kids' science projects, my mom's new obsession with birdwatching, anything to tether me to the world outside my own grief. My mom, who lives 3 states away, somehow arranged for a grocery delivery to appear on my doorstep every Sunday, filled with my favorites. A coworker I'd always been friendly with, but never close to, slipped a note on my desk that just said, "My couch, Friday night, bad movies and worse wine. No is not an option." I learned to say yes. It was hard at first. My instinct was to curl up to hide the mess. I'd become accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But slowly, I realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was the invitation that let people in. I let Sarah see me cry into my lasagna. I told my sister about the crushing fear that I couldn't manage my own life. I showed up on that coworker's couch in my rattiest sweatpants, And we laughed, until we cried at a truly terrible romantic comedy. The village wasn't just a metaphor, it was a living, breathing organism of support. My college friends, the ones I'd barely seen in years, organized a girls' trip. It was just a weekend at a cabin 2 hours away. But it felt like a lifeline. There were no deep probing questions about the breakup. There was just hiking and board games. And sitting around a fire, one of them, Chloe, told a story about her own divorce, about the time she accidentally dyed all her towels pink. It was silly, but it was a story of survival. It was a quiet message: I've been here, you will get through this. Those shared experiences, the late-night talks that wandered from profound to ridiculous, were like bricks. Each one was another brick, laid down, rebuilding my sense of self, my self-esteem. Months passed, the vortex of grief receded, replaced by a new rhythm. My calendar, once a barren wasteland, was full: dinner with Sarah, a book club. My sister dragged me into Sunday video calls with my parents. I started going to a yoga class with a neighbor. I rediscovered the joy of cooking for one, of decorating my space exactly how I wanted it. The confidence I found wasn't the brittle kind that needs constant validation. It was quieter, deeper. It came from knowing that my happiness wasn't dependent on one person's presence in my life. It was woven from 100 different threads of connection. My foundation was no longer a single precarious pillar. It was a wide, unshakable web. The internal work was slower and messier. I started seeing a therapist. She called what you did future faking, painting a picture of a life that was always just out of reach to keep me compliant. We unpacked all of it. The constant criticism, disguised as concern, the way my opinions became silly, and my successes became cute. I filled journals with it. I wrote down my own values, what I actually believed in, separate from what you had told me to believe. I practiced saying no. At first it was just to. I didn't think much about him during this time. The phantom pain was gone. But I did hear things through the grapevine that his new life wasn't the grand adventure he'd imagined, that he'd fallen out with his best friend over the whole situation, that he seemed lonely. The irony was thick. The person who had claimed I had no one had, in the process of leaving, managed to isolate himself. Then one Saturday I posted a picture. It was from my birthday. My sister had thrown a surprise party in her backyard. The photo was a group shot: me, parents beaming, Sarah making a silly face, my nieces hanging off my legs, a whole crowd of friends with their arms around each other. My face in that picture was radiant, with a joy that was completely authentically my own. It was a picture of a life full to bursting. He saw it a few days later. A text message popped up, a number I hadn't deleted, but had forgotten was even in my phone. Hey, saw your picture, you look really happy. I didn't respond. Then another message: can we talk? We met at a neutral coffee shop. He looked different, thinner, a little worn around the edges. The confidence he'd worn like a shield was gone. He fiddled with his cup, not meeting my eyes for a long time. And then he said it. I was wrong. The words hung in the air between us. I was so wrong about you. I thought you needed me to be strong. I thought if I left you'd fall apart. It was arrogant. I see that now. But seeing you now with all those people, I didn't realize you had that. I didn't realize you were that strong. He looked up, and his eyes were full of a startling regret. The truth is, I look at my life now, and it's quiet. I burned a lot of bridges. I thought I was being independent, but I was just being alone. Seeing you surrounded by all that love, it made me realize what I gave up: not just you, but the whole village. I listened. I heard the apology. I saw the loneliness in him, and for a second I felt a pang of something like pity. But that was all. The panic, the desire to fix him, the urge to make his pain go away, it was completely gone. I finally understood that my worth was never something he got to define. It had been affirmed every day by my sister's phone calls, by Sarah's lasagna, by my friends' terrible movie nights. My value was reflected back at me in the eyes of the people who loved me without condition. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cool now. I looked at him, this man who had once been my entire world, and I felt nothing but a gentle final closure. Thank you for saying that, I said, my voice steady. But my strength was never about proving you wrong. It was about remembering what was already there. I stood up, leaving my half-finished cup on the table. I didn't need to say anything else as I walked out of the coffee shop and into the sunny afternoon. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt whole. The village hadn't just shown him otherwise, it had shown me. It had reminded me that I was never just one half of a couple. I was a daughter, a sister, a friend. I was a thread in a beautiful, strong, and enduring tapestry. And that was a foundation no one could ever take away. You called me weak at the end. You said I was unstable, that my emotions were a storm you couldn't. Whether you said I was too much love, too much need, too much sadness, you framed my deepest feelings as a personal failing, a flaw in my character that made me impossible to love. And then, as a final twist of the knife, you said you knew I'd come crawling back. You said it with such certainty, leaning against the doorframe of our apartment. The one I had to leave. You told me I wouldn't survive without you, that I'd realize how good I had it, how I'd ruined it with my neediness. That prophecy was your masterpiece. It wasn't a prediction, it was a trap. You were planting a seed in my mind. A little ticking time bomb of dependence. You wanted me to feel so broken that the only path forward would lead right back to your doorstep, validating your cruelty. And the worst part, the part that haunted me for months, was that a part of me believed you, a terrified, hollowed-out part of me, whispered that you were right, that I was too. Telemarketers, then to friends, if I was tired, the word no became a sacred thing. It was the foundation of my new boundaries. I was rediscovering my own voice, and it was steadier than I remembered. Damaged to function on my own, that your love, however conditional, was the only thing holding me together. That first month was a blur of pure survival. I'd cry in the shower, so my new roommate wouldn't hear. I'd jump every time my phone lit up, hoping it was you. Terrified it was you. Your voice was on a loop in my head, a constant commentary on everything. I did. You're handling this poorly. You're being irrational. See, this is why you're alone. I knew I couldn't live inside that echo chamber forever. Making the appointment with the therapist felt like lifting a weight. I didn't have the strength for sitting in that waiting room. I felt like a fraud. I was cert. She would see right through me, that she'd confirm what you said, that I was just fundamentally weak. Therapy was nothing like I expected. It wasn't about blaming you. It was about unpacking the toolkit. You'd left me with a toolkit full of broken tools. We started with the language. We took words like too much and needy and held them up to the light. My therapist asked me simple, devastating questions. When you felt sad, what did you need? And I'd say comfort, reassurance, and she'd say, and is needing comfort a sign of weakness or a sign of being human? It was like learning a new alphabet. We talked about boundaries, a concept that felt foreign and selfish. I practiced saying no to small things. I practiced stating my needs clearly without apologizing for them. I remember one session where we spent the entire hour dissecting a single text message I'd drafted to a friend, just to make sure I wasn't bending over backwards to accommodate them. It was exhausting, meticulous work. I started a journal. At first it was just a log of the pain, but my therapist asked me to add one thing each day, a small victory. Drank a full glass of water, walked around the block, didn't check your social media. At first the victories felt pathetic, but slowly they began to accumulate. The entries shifted from I miss him to I finished that project at work to I felt happy for a full hour today and didn't feel guilty about it. The change wasn't a lightning bolt, it was a slow sunrise. I didn't wake up one day a new person. I just woke up one day and realized your voice in my head had gotten quieter. It had been replaced by something gentler, something that sounded a lot like my own voice, but a version I hadn't heard since I was a child. A voice that could say you're tired, that's okay, instead of you're lazy. A voice that said that was a mistake, let's learn from it, instead of you're a failure. This was self-compassion. It felt clumsy at first, like wearing a new pair of shoes, but it started to fit. I began to validate myself. When I felt proud of something, I'd allow myself to feel it fully without waiting for external praise. When I felt sad, I'd sit with the feeling, acknowledge it, and ask myself what I needed instead of rushing to numb it or fearing it made me unstable. This was when you tried to come back. It was a classic Hoover, just like my therapist said might happen. A late-night text, hey, just thinking about you, hope you're okay. My heart didn't leap, it didn't sink, it just noted the message. I felt a calm I'd never associated with you. Before I didn't respond immediately, I sat with it. I recognized it for what it was, a test of the new boundaries I'd built. When I did reply hours later, it was simple, I am doing well, thank you, hope you are too. Your confusion was palpable even through the phone. The script you'd written had me responding with desperate questions or emotional pleas. My calm, polite distance wasn't part of the narrative you'd constructed for us. You tried again a few weeks later. This time, with a provocation, you mentioned a memory from our relationship, something you knew had been painful for me, framed as a joke. The old me would have erupted, giving you the emotional reaction. You craved the proof that you still had a hook in me. The new me simply wrote back, I remember. The external changes were just a reflection of what was happening inside. My hair had always been a certain way. Because you liked it. I cut it all off, I dyed it. A color you would have hated, I cleared out my closet, getting rid of the sophisticated gray and black. And filling it with colors that made me happy, a bright yellow sweater, a dress, covered in flowers. I stood up straighter. I looked people in the eye when I talked to them, my social media, which had been a curated gallery of the life you wanted to project. That differently, I am not interested in revisiting it. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just a firm, peaceful statement of my reality. The silence from your end was louder than any message. You couldn't penetrate that peace. It was a fortress you hadn't anticipated, built brick by brick, in a therapist's office, and in the quiet moments of my own company. The final time I saw you was by chance at a coffee shop. I was reading a book, and I looked up, and there you were. For a second I saw the old mask, the confident, slightly arrogant smirk. But it faltered when you saw me. I didn't look away. I didn't tense up, I just nodded a small neutral acknowledgement. You walked over, and instead of the grand dramatic return you might have imagined, it was quiet. You sat down. And you looked lost. You whispered that you'd heard I was doing good, that you'd been doing some thinking. Then came the admission, not of love, but of your own issues. You talked about your own struggles, your own fears. You said you'd been in a bad place when we were together, that you didn't know how to handle something real. You were finally being honest. But it wasn't a confession meant to win me back. It was a quiet unloading of a burden. I listened with a genuine empathy. I didn't know I possessed for you anymore. I saw the vulnerability, the human being behind the gaslighting and the cruelty. But the most profound feeling was the absence of a need. I didn't feel the urge to comfort you, to fix you, to dive back into the chaos, to save you. My own cup was finally full. I had proven your prophecy wrong, not to you, but to myself. The victory wasn't your admission of fault. The victory was my silent internal knowledge that I was whole without it. When you finished, there was a long silence. You looked at me expecting something, an invitation, an absolution. I simply smiled, a gentle, close-lipped smile. I said, thank you for sharing that with me. I truly hope you find your own peace. And then I said the two most powerful words I've ever spoken. Goodbye, Alex. It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic. It was a simple, firm closing of a door that I had already locked from the inside. I gathered my book and my coffee, and I walked out. I didn't look back. The closure wasn't in your apology. The closure was in my ability to walk away finally, completely, and peacefully, having learned that his definition of weakness was my definition of strength all along. The day you left, the sun was shining. It was one of those clear, bright afternoons that felt like it should be in a movie. But the air in our apartment was thick and cold. I remember the way the light hit the dust motes dancing over the half-empty bookcase, the one you never got around to filling. You stood by the door with that one small suitcase, the one you used for weekend trips, as if that's all. This was your face was set not in anger, but in this calm, terrifying certainty. You told me it was over. You said you needed more excitement, more passion, more life. You said our life together had become a quiet, predictable routine, a slow death by 1,000 tiny compromises. And you said it all with this placid smile, like you were a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis, that only you could see. I was crumbling inside, my hands shaking so badly I had to hide them behind my back, but you were perfectly steady. And then you said the words that would echo in my mind for years. You looked me right in the eye, and your voice was so soft, so sure. You said you are choosing a small life, a safe life. And that's fine for you. But I am meant for bigger things. I am going to build something extraordinary. And y'all just stay here. Y'all be comfortable. Y'all be fine. But y'all never be truly happy, because you don't have the courage to reach for it. Y'all look back in 3 years and see that I was right. My life will be a masterpiece, and yours will still be a sketch. Became a real chronicle of my new one. Pictures of me laughing with my sister, covered in paint, crossing a finish line at a 5K. It wasn't a performance. It was genuine. I was genuinely happy. You closed the door so gently. The click of the latch was quieter than I ever remembered it being. And I was alone in the silence. You left behind the ghost of your prophecy, hanging in the air like poison. The first few months were a blur of pain. I functioned, but barely. I went to work. I came home. I stared at the walls. Your words were my constant companion. Y'all never be truly happy. They played on a loop, a soundtrack to my grief. I questioned everything. Were you right? Was I just small? Was my desire for a calm home, for quiet companionship, a sign of cowardice? But then something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was the slow, stubborn resilience of a plant. Turning toward the light, I realized I had a choice. I could let your prophecy define me, or I could simply live. But this time I would live for myself, not for the life I thought we were building together, not for your idea of what was big or extraordinary. I started small. I repainted the bedroom a color you would have hated, a warm buttery yellow. I got a cat from the shelter, a scruffy thing that purred like a motorboat. I started cooking meals, just for me, experimenting with recipes I'd always been too nervous to try. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, wed, have long meandering conversations that didn't have to end. Because you were waiting, I poured myself into my work, not for a promotion, but for the simple satisfaction of doing something well. I started hiking on weekends, just me and the trees. I learned to be quiet with myself, to listen to my own thoughts, without the noise of your judgments. It was a slow, often difficult climb. There were days the loneliness was a physical ache. But with each small choice, each act of quiet self-care, I was building a foundation. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a masterpiece by your definition. But it was real, it was stable, it was mine. And through the grapevine, I'd hear things about you. At first, it was exactly what you'd promised. You'd moved in with Sarah, the woman from your office, who was so dynamic, so ambitious. There were pictures of you two, at glamorous parties, on sudden trips to tropical locations. Your social media was a curated gallery of your extraordinary life. It looked like a masterpiece in progress. For a while, I'll admit it stung. It seemed like your prophecy was coming true. But then, the cracks began to show. The posts became less frequent, the smiles in the photos looked strained. A mutual friend mentioned offhand that the startup you'd jumped to was having funding issues, that the pressure was immense, the constant need to be on, to be achieving, to be living this big cinematic life was starting to wear thin. Your ascent, it turned out, was on a shaky ladder. You were climbing fast, but the structure couldn't support the weight of your ambition. Meanwhile, my life kept quietly solidifying. I didn't get a dramatic promotion. I earned the deep respect of my colleagues and a sense of genuine mastery in my field. I didn't travel the world, but I knew every trail in the state park near my home. I didn't have a whirlwind romance, but I had a circle of friends who showed up with soup when I was sick and celebrated my small victories with genuine joy. My life wasn't a sketch anymore. It was a detailed drawing filled with small, precise lines of contentment. It had depths. And you noticed it started subtly, a like on a photo from 6 months ago, then a comment on a post about my art show. I didn't know you painted, looks great. It was so calculated, a friendly, innocent text. A week later, hey, hope you're well, saw you ran a race, that's awesome. I didn't respond, not out of gamesmanship, but because I truly had nothing to say. Your presence on the periphery of my life was like a faint signal from a radio station I'd long since stopped listening to. I could see you watching. The twist came 3 years almost to the day after you walked out. It was a Tuesday evening. I was on the sofa, my cat curled on my lap, reading a book. The room was peaceful. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from a number I hadn't seen in years, but I knew it instantly. It was you. The message was long. It didn't start with a hello. It started with an admission. You wrote that Sarah had left you, that the startup had collapsed, taking most of your savings with it. You said you were living in a temporary sublet, surrounded by boxes, and you had never felt more alone. You said the high life you'd chased had turned out to be hollow. The parties were just rooms full of noise. The ambition was just a race, with no finish line. And then you wrote the words that took my breath away. You said, I was looking at old photos. Tonight I saw a picture of us from that picnic we had by the lake. You were laughing. You looked so peaceful. And I realized I have spent the last 3 years running so fast trying to build this grand life that I forgot what it felt like to actually be happy. I was so arrogant. I thought your life was small. But it wasn't. It was solid. It was real. I thought I was the one painting a masterpiece, but I was just throwing paint at a wall. You were the one building something that would last. I see it now. My prophecy, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I am the one who is not truly happy. I am the one who was afraid. I was afraid of the quiet. I was afraid that if I stopped moving, I'd find out there was nothing there, and I was right. I read the text again and again. There was no satisfaction in it, no schadenfreude. Instead, I felt a profound, aching sense of irony. Time and the natural consequences of our choices had performed a perfect karmic reversal. The future you had so confidently predicted for me, life of safe, quiet dissatisfaction, had become your present reality, and the life you had claimed for yourself had evaporated, revealing the emptiness beneath the spectacle. The circle closed with my silence. I didn't write back. What was there to say? Any comfort I offered would be condescending. Any anger would be pointless. Your confession was the full unvarnished truth, and my response was the life I had built, the peace in my quiet apartment, the purring cat on my lap, the simple pleasure of a good book on a Tuesday night. That was my answer. Your words had come full circle, and in doing so they had lost all their power over me. The lesson wasn't about winning or losing, it was about the nature of strength. Your arrogance, your belief that you were destined for a superior kind of happiness, was the very thing that caused your fall. You were so busy looking at the horizon that you never learned to appreciate the ground beneath your feet. My humility, my willingness to start small, to find joy in the ordinary, to build slowly and authentically, that was the true strength. It was the strength that creates a life that can withstand storms, a life that doesn't crumble when the spotlight fades. Your prophecy was indeed self-fulfilling, but the subject was always you. You forecasted your own fate, the moment you mistook noise for music and spectacle for substance. It was a strange way for a relationship to end, don't you think? Not with a conversation, not even with a slammed door. It ended in the quiet blue light of my phone screen. I was lying in our bed, and he was in the next room. I could hear the faint click-clack of his keyboard. He was probably already updating his dating profile. Then my phone buzzed a notification. He'd posted something. It was a picture of a sunset, one he'd taken weeks ago, on a trip I couldn't join because of work. The caption was, "What did it?" Just 3 words. But they felt like a public execution. New dawn finally. And the comments, our mutual friends, they were already chiming in. King 1 wrote, "You deserve this upgrade," said another. It was a coordinated attack, and I was the target, lying there in the dark, silently absorbing every digital bullet. From a distance, the life you were so sure would collapse without you, and instead it was flourishing. It was brighter and more solid than it had ever been. The private message came a few minutes later. I guess the public post wasn't enough. The little text bubble popped up, and I watched those 3 dots dance, taunting me. His message was cold, precise. He said he hoped I understood that this was for the best, and then he wrote the words that would become the fuel for everything that came next. He said, "Just so we're crystal clear, if you ever think about crawling back, don't. I've moved on to better things." I didn't reply. I just put my phone face down on the nightstand. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I could still smell his cologne on the pillow next to me. That was the lowest point, the feeling of being so thoroughly dismissed, so easily replaced, and so publicly humiliated. He hadn't just broken up with me, he'd framed the entire narrative. He was the hero moving on to his new dawn, and I was the dead weight he'd left behind in the dark. So I made a decision right then. If the battlefield was going to be digital, then that's where I would win the war. But my victory wouldn't look like his. It wouldn't be loud or boastful. It would be quiet, undeniable proof. The first thing I did was disappear, not from life, but from the feeds. I deleted the apps from my phone. I told my closest friends I was taking a break, that I was okay, just needed some space. The silence online was intentional. I wanted him to wonder. I wanted that last image of me to be the one he'd created, the sad, discarded ex. I wanted him to feel secure in that narrative for a little while longer. And in that silence, I got to work, the real work. I threw myself into my job, not for the approval of some boss, but because I remembered that I was good at it. I started saying yes to things I'd always said no to. Before a colleague invited me to a networking event, I went, and I didn't cling to the wall. I talked to people. I remembered how to laugh without forcing it. I joined a gym. The first day was terrifying. I felt every imaginary eye on me judging my weak attempts on the treadmill, but I kept going. The pain in my muscles was a welcome distraction from the ache in my heart. Slowly, the runs got easier. I could lift a little more weight. I started noticing the definition in my own arms, the strength in my legs. It wasn't about looking good for anyone else. It was about feeling strong in a body that had felt like a trap for months. I reconnected with friends he'd never really liked, the ones who were too loud or too quirky for his taste. We had dinners where the conversation was messy and real. We went on a spontaneous weekend trip to a cabin with no wife. I stood on a dock at sunrise, the air cold and clean in my lungs. And for the first time in a year, I felt a genuine, unforced peace. I didn't take a picture. That moment was just for me, but I stored the feeling away. 6 months, that's how long I was gone, the digital ghost. And then one morning I reinstalled the apps. My profile was a relic, pictures of us, captions filled with his name. I spent an afternoon curating. I didn't wipe the slate completely clean. That would have looked like I was erasing him, which would have meant he still had power over me. Instead, I archived the overly coupley photos. I kept a few from trips cropping him out, or just letting them exist as memories of a place, not a person. My bio, which had been a cheesy inside joke between us, became simple direct my name my profession, a simple emoji of a mountain. My return wasn't an announcement, it was a quiet reappearance. The first post was a picture from that cabin weekend. It wasn't of me, it was a landscape, the lake perfectly still mirroring the pine trees. And the pink morning sky. The caption was simple quiet moments are the loudest. It was true, it was me. And it was a world away from his flashy look at my life sunset post. Then came the direct reach out. It was a plea to meet, a long email full of apologies I'd begged for years ago. You admitted you'd made a mistake, you said you'd been watching me. And you barely recognized me, that you missed me, that you were proud of me. The old me would have clung to those words like a lifeline. The new me read them once, felt a distant pang of pity, and closed the laptop. You persisted, you called finally, more out of a sense of closure than anything else. I agreed to meet for coffee. The strategy was to post constantly. It was to post meaningfully, a story of me and my friends, laughing, really laughing at a stupid movie. A picture of the finished mock-up for a major project at work, with a caption about the pride of building something from nothing, a screenshot of my hiking app showing a new personal best on a trail I'd been struggling with. There were no sad quotes, no veiled messages. There was just life, a full, vibrant, interesting life that was happening completely without him. And people noticed. The comments were filled with old friends, saying, "Wow, you look amazing," or "So proud of you." The engagement was organic, it was real, and I knew with a cold certainty that he was seeing it all. The social media grapevine is a powerful thing. He started appearing in the list of story viewers every single time. At first it was just his name, a silent ghost haunting the periphery of my new world. Then he started liking my posts, not the personal ones, never the pictures with friends, but the professional achievements, the arty landscape shots. It was a careful, calculated engagement. He was trying to insert himself back into my narrative as a supportive spectator. I never liked a single post of his back. I never watched his stories. To me, his profile was a ghost town. I didn't need to see it to know what was there. The little I heard from mutual friends was telling he'd hopped from one short-lived relationship to another. His posts were increasingly bitter, vague, booking about loyalty and people who don't know what they have. The contrast was becoming stark. My feed was a gallery of quiet growth. His was a monument to public stagnation. Then the messages started. They were subtle at first, a reply to a story with a laughing emoji, then a question, "Hey, that hike looks amazing, which trail was that?" I left them all on read. The silence from my end was louder than any response could ever be. I wasn't playing hard to get, I was being impossible to get. I had built a fortress of my own contentment, and he was on the outside, tapping on the glass. The final message came on a Tuesday night. I was packing for a solo trip to Lisbon, a trip I'd booked on a whim. After getting a bonus, my phone lit up. It was him, his name on my screen, felt like a message from a different lifetime. I opened it. It was a wall of text. It started with an apology, but it was the kind of apology that was really about him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he wrote. "I realize now how much pressure I was under back then. I wasn't myself." Then came the nostalgia, the reminders of good times. And then the pivot, the line I knew was coming, the one he said I'd never have the nerve to attempt. "Seeing you thrive like this, it's made me see things clearly." He wrote, "The truth is I miss you, I miss us. I was an idiot, I know, I said some harsh things, and I wouldn't blame you if you told me to get lost. But if there's any chance at all, I'd crawl back to you in a heartbeat." There it was, the crawl, the very thing he swore I would never do. The power in that moment was intoxicating. But it was a quiet, calm kind of power. It wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about clarity. I read the message again. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I felt nothing for him, no anger, no longing, not even pity, just a profound sense of distance. I had a choice. I could ignore it, which would be the ultimate power move. I could send a scathing reply, listing every way he'd hurt me. Or I could do something else entirely. I thought about it for a full day. I went to Lisbon. I walked the cobblestone streets, ate pastéis de nata, and stood at the edge of the continent looking out at the endless ocean. And I realized that a bitter reply would still be a form of engagement. It would mean he was still taking up space in my head, and ignoring him felt a little. The confrontation was nothing like I'd ever imagined. I arrived calm. I'd worn the yellow sweater. You were already there fidgeting with your cup. You looked the same, but smaller. Somehow your confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. You launched into your rehearsed speech about therapy, about realizing what you'd lost. You talked about us, about a future. I just listened, I didn't interrupt. When you finished, there was a long silence. You looked at me waiting for my reaction, for the validation you were so sure would come. Cruel, a little too much like the games he would play. So the night before I flew home, I typed a reply. It was brief, it was gracious, it was final. I wrote, "Hi, thanks for your message. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for. I am on my own path now. And it's a good one, all the best." I didn't block him, I didn't need to. The message was a gentle, firm closing of a door. I had proven him wrong without a single argument, without a raised voice. My life documented in pixels and posts. Had done all the talking. The victory wasn't in his regret. It was in my indifference. The audience of one I had been playing to wasn't him anymore, it was me. And I was finally completely convinced. The day he left, he stood in the doorway with a suitcase in one hand. And that look on his face, not quite sadness, more like a cold kind of certainty. He said the words, so calmly, like he was commenting on the weather. "Y'all never manage this, you can't handle them on your own, the bills, the schedules, the meltdowns. It's too much for you. Y'all be begging for my help. Within 6 months, y'all be crawling back." I remember the weight of my daughter clinging to my leg, her little face pressed into my jeans. I remember my son trying to be so brave, standing stiffly by the sofa, his chin trembling. And I remember the absolute silence that followed his pronouncement. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a judgment, a prophecy of my failure. He wasn't just leaving me, he was leaving us. And he was convinced. He was the essential pillar holding this whole shaky structure up. His final gift was the prediction of my collapse. In that moment, something in me didn't break, it hardened, it crystallized. As the door clicked shut, the fear was a physical thing, a heavy blanket trying to smother me. But underneath it was a new kind of fire. It was a quiet, fierce determination that started deep in my bones. He was wrong, he had to be wrong. This wasn't about me anymore, or my pride. This was about the two small, scared people left in this suddenly too big living room. My motivation was to prove him wrong. For the sake of it, it was to build a fortress of happiness and safety for my children, a home so strong his absence wouldn't even be a draft. The first few months were pure, unadulterated chaos. It was a whirlwind of forgotten permission, slips, burnt dinners, tears at bedtime, sometimes minute, trying to figure out a budget that now had a huge gaping hole in it. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing, making lists, worrying about the water heater making that strange noise, about whether my son was acting out at school. Because of all this, about how I was going to afford new sneakers for my daughter, when she'd outgrown hers seemingly overnight. There were moments in the deep exhaustion of a 2 a.m. nightmare soothing session when his voice would echo in my head, "Y'all be begging." And I'd clench my jaw, take a deep breath, and just keep moving. Slowly, though the chaos began to recede, it was like learning a new language. We developed our own rhythms, our own silly traditions. Tuesday nights became pancake for dinner night, a rebellion against proper meals that the kids adored. Saturday mornings were for library trips, and sprawling on the living room floor with a giant pile of books, we had dance parties in the kitchen. While washing dishes, the house was messier, sure, but it was filled with laughter, real laughter, not the tense, careful kind from before. And in that moment, I almost did. The urge was a physical force, a tremor in my knees, begging them to buckle, to plead, to promise anything to make you stay, to take back the truth I'd finally spoken. Because you were my world, the axis, everything spun around. And you knew it. That prophecy wasn't a guess. It was a weapon designed to hang over me, to keep me small. Even after you were gone, the weight of it crushed the air from my lungs. I just stood there silent, as you walked out into the hallway, the click of the latch echoing. And I said very quietly, "Thank you for saying that." Your face lit up with hope. Then I continued, "But that person you're talking about, the person you want back, she doesn't exist anymore." You were right about one thing, someone did come crawling back. I let the words hang in the air between us. I saw the realization dawn in your eyes, the painful, crushing understanding. The prophecy had fulfilled itself. But it had landed on the wrong person. You had crawled back to a version of me you could no longer touch. I saw my children begin to bloom in this new environment. My son, who had been so quiet, started talking more, sharing stories about his friends at school. He started building elaborate Lego creations that took over the coffee table, and I never once told him to clean them up right away. My daughter discovered a love for drawing, and our refrigerator became a gallery of her brightly colored masterpieces, held up by rainbow magnets. Their happiness, their sense of security, became my greatest source of pride. It was a quiet, profound satisfaction that filled me up in a way nothing else ever had. His visitation days were every other weekend. At first the kids would come back quiet, a little withdrawn, needing time to settle back into the warmth of our home. But as time went on they'd come back chattering. They'd tell me about the movie they saw or the pizza they had. But the stories were always punctuated with comparisons. Dad's apartment doesn't have a yard like we do, or he let us stay up late. But I missed our story time. They'd talk about the things we did here, or pancake nights, our dance parties, with a fondness that told me everything. He was providing entertainment, but I was building a home, and they knew the difference. I started to notice a change in him. When he'd come to pick them up, he'd stand at the door, and his eyes would scan the living room. He'd see the art on the fridge, the Legos on the table, the general happy clutter of a lived-in life. He'd see the kids run to him, but then run back to grab a drawing to show him something that was part of our world, that they wanted to share with his. There was a look in his eyes. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of bewildered loss. He was seeing the family unit, the one he had declared unsustainable, not just surviving but thriving, and he was firmly on the outside of it. I heard through mutual friends that his new life, the one he'd chosen, wasn't the freedom he'd imagined. It was lonely. The silence of his apartment after dropping the kids off was apparently a lot louder than the chaos he'd wanted to escape. He had his freedom, but he was discovering that freedom from responsibility is just another word for emptiness. He missed the noise. He missed the mess. He missed the bedtime stories and the morning chaos. He was starting to realize that his absence was an ache for him, not for us. We had filled the space he left behind. Then the plea came. It wasn't a text. It was a phone call. His voice hesitant, stripped of all the certainty he'd had that day. In the doorway he asked if we could talk. I agreed to meet him at a park, a neutral space. He looked older. The confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He fidgeted. He struggled to make eye contact. He started talking, his words tumbling out. He admitted it. He said, I was wrong. I was so completely wrong. He talked about how he'd been a fool, how he'd taken everything for granted. He said he saw how amazing the kids were doing, how happy they seemed. He said, you've done an incredible job. You're an incredible mother. And then he said the words I never thought I'd hear. I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. I miss you. I miss the kids. I miss our life. Stood up, leaving my full cup of coffee on the table. I truly hope you find what you're looking for, I said, and I meant it. In that moment, I felt a profound shift. The power in the conversation didn't rest with him, the one making the grand request. It rested with me, the one holding the life he now wanted back. I held the keys to the family he had voluntarily walked away from. There was no desperation in me, no urge to leap at the chance. There was only a deep, calm assessment. My focus wasn't on my own heart, which felt surprisingly still. It was on my children's well-being, on the beautiful, stable life we had painstakingly built from the ashes of his departure. I looked at him, this man who had been so sure of my failure, now sitting here humble and pleading. And I knew that any decision had to come from a position of strength, not from a place of need. I wasn't a drowning woman being thrown a lifeline. I was the captain of a ship that had successfully navigated a terrible storm, and he was asking permission to come aboard again. I told him I needed to think. I told him that our children's peace was my only priority, that the home we had now was sacred, and I wouldn't let anything disrupt it. I said I would talk to the kids in an age-appropriate way and see how they felt, but I made it clear that this wasn't a simple yes or no. It was a discussion about whether his return would truly be best for the family he'd left behind, the family that had learned so beautifully how to stand on its own 2 feet. The power wasn't in taking him back. The power was in carefully, thoughtfully deciding if he even deserved a place in the beautiful life we had built without him. I walked out of that cafe and into the sunlight. There was no dramatic victory music, no feeling of revenge, just a profound, deep-seated peace. The lesson wasn't about winning a breakup. It was about the quiet, methodical power of rebuilding yourself from the foundation up. True power doesn't come from needing someone else to validate your existence. It comes from building a life so complete, so authentically your own, that no one else can ever hold it hostage again. You thought I would crawl back to you. Instead, I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet, and I've never stood taller. He said it right there in the middle of our favorite coffee shop. The air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and steamed milk, and every table was full. It was our place, or it had been. He made sure everyone heard it. His voice was loud, too loud for the quiet hum of a Saturday morning. He leaned across the table, his face cold, and said, "Y'all see, you can't do this without me, y'all come crawling back, you always do, I remember the way." The couple at the next table suddenly got very interested in their muffins. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a burning flush of shame, that traveled from my chest all the way to the tips of my ears. Their eyes were like little pinpricks on my skin. I could see the pity in them, that mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity people have when they witness a car crash in slow motion. I didn't say a word, I just sat there, my hands wrapped around my cooling mug, and took it. But inside something shifted. It was a tiny hard seed, a little stone of pure defiance. He was wrong, he was so completely, utterly wrong, and I was going to prove it. The days after were a blur of numbness, but that little seed started to grow. This wasn't just about getting over him. This was about rewriting the ending. I wasn't going to just move on quietly. I needed a statement, a rebuttal, a public correction to his humiliating prediction. It was luck, or maybe fate, that brought Mark back into my life, an old friend from college, someone I'd always admired. He was always the steady one, the kind who built his success quietly without needing to tear anyone else down. We reconnected online, just a simple comment on a photo that turned into a message, then a coffee. And it was easy, there was no games, no mind-reading, no walking on eggshells. He was genuinely kind, successful, in a way that didn't need to be announced, and secure in himself. He was everything my ex was not. And I knew the moment we started talking that he was the key. It wasn't about using him. It was about choosing someone who represented the exact opposite of what I'd left behind. We started spending time together, and I made a decision we wouldn't hide. We would go to the same farmer's market, the same park, the same bookstore, and we would definitely, without a doubt, go back to that coffee shop. In the silence you left behind. I chose a Saturday morning, the same time, the same day of the week as the breakup. It felt poetic. Walking in my heart was hammering against my ribs. I could feel the memory of that day like a chill in the air. But Mark's hand was warm on the small of my back, a gentle, steadying pressure. We took a table, not the same one, but a better one, right in the center of the room. We ordered. I got my usual. But this time I didn't hesitate. I laughed at something Mark said, a real, genuine laugh that came from my stomach. It felt foreign and wonderful. I saw the same barista from that day glance over, and I offered a small, confident smile. We talked, our heads closed together, the conversation flowing effortlessly. I was hyper-aware of the door every time the bell jingled. And then it happened, the bell rang, and he walked in alone. The look on his face was something I will treasure forever. It was a complete system failure. First, there was casual recognition, his eyes scanning the room out of habit. Then they landed on me. There was a flicker of surprise. Then they darted to Mark, then back to me. His brain was trying to process the data, and it was short-circuiting. His mouth actually fell open, just a little. He tried to recover, to school his features into indifference. But it was too late. I'd seen the shock, the confusion, and the beginnings of a deep, wounded pride. He straightened his shoulders, trying to look taller, but the effect was just strained. He looked smaller, deflated, like a balloon losing air. He went to the counter, his back rigid. But I knew he wasn't really seeing the menu. He was trying to listen, to catch a fragment of our conversation. So I gave him one. I leaned forward, placing my hand over Mark's on the table. "I am just so happy," I said, my voice clear and warm, carrying just enough to be heard. "It's amazing how things work out when you're finally with someone who actually supports you." Mark, to his credit, played along perfectly. He squeezed my hand, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The feeling is mutual," he said, his voice a low, comfortable rumble. "We weren't putting on a show. We were just being us." But to my ex it must have been a spectacular performance. He got his coffee and stood there for a moment, paralyzed. He couldn't sit down because there were no empty tables near us. He couldn't leave without it looking like a retreat. So he just stood by the pickup counter, sipping his drink, a statue of awkwardness. And we ignored him completely. We were in our own little bubble of happiness, and he was just part of the scenery. I knew he would break. The need to reassert control, to insert himself into the narrative, was too strong. He finally started walking towards our table. His steps were hesitant, almost stumbling. He looked nervous, his eyes darting between Mark and me. He stopped at the edge of our table, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Hey," he said, his voice unnaturally high. "Fancy seeing you here." I looked up, my expression polite and neutral, the way you'd look at a vaguely familiar acquaintance. "Oh, hello," I said, my tone light and friendly. There was no coldness, no anger that would have given him power. This was just nothing. He was a non-event. He shifted his weight. I just wanted to say hi. "See how you're doing." He glanced at Mark, who was watching him with a calm, unreadable expression. I am doing wonderfully, thank you, I said. This is Mark. Mark gave a brief courteous nod, but said nothing. The silence stretched out, becoming heavy and uncomfortable for him. He floundered. So you're a good, he asked lamely. I am, I said. My smile never wavering. Better than good, actually. I let the words hang in the air. He opened his mouth, probably to say something else, to try and salvage the interaction, to remind me of our history. But I cut him off gently, firmly. It was nice to see you, I said, my tone making it very clear that the conversation was over. I turned my head back to Mark, picking up our conversation right where we left off, as if he had simply vanished. And he did. He just stood there for another second, completely deflated. The crawl of shame was real. I could see it in the slump of his shoulders as he turned away. He didn't look back. He walked out of the coffee shop, the bell jingling his exit, and disappeared onto the street alone. The prophecy was shattered into a million pieces right there on the tiled floor. I watched him go for a moment, then turned my full attention back to Mark, to our coffee, to the bright, open future that was finally mine. The humiliation. I didn't move for a long time. I stood in that gray hallway surrounded by the ghosts of our life together, and I felt utterly shattered, broken into 1,000 pieces. Every memory felt like a shard of glass. But then something else happened, a different kind of tremor, not of fear, but of anger, a clean, sharp, clarifying anger. It rose up from that shattered place, and it whispered one clear thought. No. I looked at the door, I looked at the space where you had been, and I made a decision right there on the spot. He had hoped would be mine, was now entirely his own. I didn't have to crawl back. I had arrived, and I was standing taller than ever. You worked for his father's company. It was a stable job, a good salary, the kind of job people in our town dreamed of. It paid for the apartment, the car, it was safe. I had my small website, you know, the one where I posted my art, not just the art, the products, the prints, the puzzle, the notebooks with my art on it. You told me the profit from my little Etsy shop was a good hobby. It's good to have a hobby, one keeps a person busy, you used to say. The first time I said I wanted to leave that safe job and work on business full-time, I remember you laughed, not a mockery, not outright. The house was a sad, comfortable armchair in front of the TV. You laughed the same way when I found that stray cat and wanted to keep it. You said as you typed up another spreadsheet on your laptop, don't be romantic about a little hobby. This is a career, a future, a real life. The fight that broke it all, the final one, id. Just lost myself to do a kind of madness. I spent my entire bonus, the bonus from the job at your dad's company, we were going to spend on a vacation. I took the money, and I bought a large inventory of material, and I paid a real developer to build up for the e-commerce site, a proper site, not a hobby. I sold the car so that I would not turn back, no safety. I thought you'd admire the courage, that the gamble, the confidence, all of that, the action of it. You looked at me, and it was the first, not hiding the contempt. You said, it'll make you say, who needs this art? What a foolish dream. Why can a person make a good stable life so difficult? Then you told me the bet, the one you had on the phone with your father, a real conversation. That prophecy would not be my reality. I would not crawl. If I had to move forward on my hands and knees, I would be moving towards something else, away from you. The words were these, they come back, as if they were spoken in a small cave, near my ear all the time, a hum at the edge of all my thinking, that you knew the money would be useless, that the stress would break me, that I would drain every dollar. And you had a cold, quiet room inside of a voice. You say this, the final report of my failure from the very beginning. It's a fact, not punishment. In 3 months, less actually, my father, and I agree you're going to fail. You will empty that bank account. You'll be on an empty apartment, with nothing but a hard, real adult failure. In the moment of that failure, you will have a choice. You can swallow the ego, put the pride aside, you can come back, you can have a job at the father's warehouse, you will listen to the man again, or you can be a job at the coffee shop for 50-year-old, just to survive. There was no emotion, no anger. It was worse. It's the kind of conversation a business makes when the company has a bad quarter, the cold, simple calculation that there are good investments and bad investment, the project. That's what you called my biggest commitment, my life's dream, the most arrogant and most important, terrible decision I will ever make, a project with a negative ROI, a problem of a different source, and a liability from which there is one root. Me on your doorstep, or my mother's doorstep with a box. I packed my things that night. You didn't just tell me, I was not good enough, you said not good. Out of some deep, deep need to confirm that you were right. But the silence of that new, almost empty 1.5 box room, the only furniture in my mattress on the wooden floor, and my computer. The first few days were the hardest. My fingers would itch to text you, my mind would conjure up excuses, ways to bridge the gap. So I made it impossible. I sat on the floor with a box of tissues. And I deleted every photo, not just from my phone, but from the cloud. I untagged myself. I muted your friends, your family. It wasn't out of spite, it was survival. It was like pulling shrapnel from a wound. I focused on the most basic things. I made a chart on the fridge. Did you sleep? Did you eat? Did you? The question in that room hanging in the air. What if you were not lying to be cruel? What if you absolutely saw my limits with a clear eye? The bank balance on the screen in dark, orange, no distribution in the store after fees. It was a quiet desperation, not the fear of my living in the way. The possibility that the future, in your words, was still going to be proven right. The first 6 months was not a movie of triumph. The story of eating 2 days of noodles to pay the server fee, the empty gas, the laptop charger, that had always broken the last 2 weeks to hold the cable to a certain position at a strange bend, how you have a certain line of the exact position. The battery was bad, the screen, as I worked, the font is blurred for minutes before it clears. The first real turning, the real concrete proof of concept, didn't come from one single inspiration in the shower. It came on a Tuesday at 2. The reason I wasn't a real design, I was a designer who understands a community. In the forum in the early morning, I replied to a random complaint about the design, not the product, a user's problem with a pattern of design. I drew up in the 2.0, some little work to work a clear solution, along with the art for that person, just one I share to help in 3 days. My mailbox has been full. The small gesture in a long time has a chain of events. The website runs like crazy for the whole small gesture. It's all built up from there. I didn't see it, that small moment of a simple act. I just was so trapped in the failure to meet your timeline. It was not a big contract, not a big break from that small choice, only a steady climb out of the floor tile of a quiet cave and move to the light. Then there's the actual moment, a sudden hit. I made line scarves and a niche clothing, not just the fashion, a design of lines, the exact geometric of some of art, the work. A small fashion journalist discovered at the market. I gave my last money for a small booth in a trade fair, last for the last 500 in the bank, and put the last of my small box on it. The article, not only about the clothing, but the fact as the person in the second layer, the art directly, was born through the artist's journey, that kind of story. My back to the wall of your bet. Drink water. Id put a checkmark next to each one, and for a while that was the only accomplishment I needed. The week of that article, everything was a tornado of the orders. I had no capacity, no team. I lived on coffee the following 2 weeks, answering 23 hours. I was not even getting up in the middle of nowhere. I didn't have time to get up. The goal was to prove that I was not a failed project, not just to pay the rent, the true goal to become a different person, who might have a chance of standing before you not as the person to a person, with no way, than the one you declared already, a charity case, to one of a small businesswoman in her own life. The target by the new company's internal time was 18 months, the timing in my personal notebook. The last time I wrote, not I will hit my goal, it said only this sentence. The quiet note I wrote that says make it to the point where your existence must be a fact in his life. The number will do the talking. The next 2 years are not a sprint. I scaled, hired the real operational team, so that I had a person who did not even know you once worked to keep the operation, not the image. Next, the brand become big in the online space, geometric narrative fashion. The outlet had grown past, beyond the clothes lifestyle brand for artists. Then the recognition. I didn't get a news from a small article. The features at the business that matters, the mention of a business journal. They called the art of profitable brand, how to turn art into a big company, using the unique way and community. Not just that, the reporter in the journal, an audience reached out for the interest in a private investment, the capital to expand. I had to rebuild my entire support system from the ground up. Id been so isolated, my world shrinking to just you. I called my sister. I hadn't spoken to her properly in months. I said he's gone. And he said Id crawl back. She was on my doorstep in an hour with takeout. and a determined look. I forced myself to say yes to invitations. I would have normally declined a boring movie with a coworker, a walk in the park with an old friend from college. I let them talk about their lives, their problems. It was. The news didn't hit by me sending to you in the text. I just updated my business page, a routine. 2 days after the article in the journal, the target of the negotiation in a fund, as a value of a small team, I received the first contact with my ex. A friend sent me the screenshot of the public social media feed. You so happy for the success, great to see someone truly moving within a certain success. The one who made that comment, the words of you written under a mutual post, all know my work. The same voice. But the reach in the private message, later that evening the same day, it was 3 sentences. You write, I have my portfolio's assets and investment, and a substantial fund. I am beginning to think in a new strategy. I have an idea for you. This is the moment of the full turning of the table. The reply you wrote, that you think my sudden growth put me into the dangerous territory of my own. Like relearning a language, I'd forgotten language of ordinary friendship, without the constant draining drama. The real fear of you is not just about business. You see the success that we use a more appropriate tool, the correct way for a professional. That my path, my effort, the time. The idea in my head on your part, not of advice, the work for equity and opportunity, to become a success, to be there to the board of my success, especially to bring me to manage the money. To lead your advice for my own creation, to earn the profit from the result, instead of me. The phone you ring, the line, the voice, not warm. You didn't say you were wrong. The first words were to confirm that the deal for the future, I would need to avoid the growing pains of a company whose finance in a spreadsheet I manage, my bank, the books, I make the work for the business. You said, can we have a meeting about the future partnership to go to the next phase, a real partner this time, but in a more practical way. I put the phone on my boardroom, and the sound is heavy, the moment of my thought to the idea, not as a person of the dream you once saw as a liability in a business. You asked what the company would be with a real financial operator of your skill. The table was the turning now, the answer, this one question I leave. The last sentence you said to me that evening before our final word.